So, ladies and gentlemen, what I want to talk about is the fact of the recent local elections. And what we saw recently in our local elections was a complete political revolution. A complete political revolution. We saw the Reform Party gain 677 seats, storming out of the stalls from nowhere to sweep the board across the country. That is nothing less than a political earthquake inside the UK. And we need to ask why that was. Because it's obviously tapping into some kind of unsettlement in our country. And what I'd like to do is invite you just to move a bit closer. Move a bit closer, thank you. Just means I don't have to shout as much. Now, meine Stamme, our great Führer and leader, has said that he gets it and that what he needs to do is he needs to go further and faster. Now, what he actually means by that is that what he needs to do is that he needs to push the Labour agenda further and faster, because he knows that he is on a clock and he knows that he's going to lose the local election. Guys, please don't feed the trolls. Just ignore them. Now, it goes on. I want to go on. In response to a Reform victory, if you're trying to pretend that you get it, surely what you should do is look at the concerns as to why people voted for Reform. Isn't that more intelligent? Doesn't that make more sense in our democracy? So let me try to highlight than pushing the Labour agenda in response to a Reform victory, but to actually look at the reasons why people voted Reform. So allow me to elucidate some, but not all, of the reasons why people voted for Reform. And let's actually look at whether Labour is willing to tackle those issues. Firstly, we have seen undeniable and irrepressible evidence of the fact that in our country we have two-tier policing. We have seen how the police policed the riots of the BLM marches a few years ago, and how they have policed Muslim riots connected to pro-Palestinian marches, versus how they have policed the patriotic movement in this country. One is met with riot shields and horses, and the other is met with kid gloves. We have seen the fact that during the summer riots last year, from working class communities frustrated at the fact that migrants were being moved into these already poor communities, that the full weight of the law was pushed onto those rioters and those protesters, many of whom were poorly served by their crowned councillors, their crown-appointed councillors, to plead guilty when in fact there was a good chance that they would have been found not guilty. And so we have two-tier judiciary in this country as well. we see the politicization of our legal system, that it is siding with left-wing narratives.
It's the hay fever.
It's the cold.
You should take Paracetamol.
It's the flu. No, ladies and gentlemen, we also see that we've lost control of our southern borders. You can literally enter this country on a boat without any consequence, and that you're going to instead be housed in hotels paid for by the British taxpayer to the tune of £1 billion a year, I believe.
No, £8 million a day.
There you go, £8 million a day, ladies and gentlemen.
They're Muslims.
No, ladies and gentlemen, please, bro, just be quiet. Let me do the talk. Every week, I always attract the mentally unwell. No, ladies and gentlemen. No, ladies and gentlemen. Because they're looking for your attention, so please just ignore them. Furthermore, ladies and gentlemen, if you enter the country via an airport illegally, you will be prosecuted. But if you come over on a dinghy, you will be housed like you're some kind of victim and not actually a criminal, which is what you actually are. We then see that these migrants illegally attending are coming and receiving freebies by the state. The London Mayor and the London Assembly have given free passes for travel for migrants. But all of you are having to pay to travel around London. We are paying for their accommodation when there are veterans and British people homeless on our streets that the British government will not house, ladies and gentlemen. These are the reasons why people are voting reform.
What's this got to do with your
What the British people want is for illegal migrants to be returned and for British homeless to be housed. What we want is for the British government to crack down on grooming gangs and rape gangs, Muslim rape gangs that have been allowed to operate in the UK unchallenged by the state because the Labour Party wanted the Muslim vote in their constituencies. And so they sacrificed the children of this country. And trash like him think that it's funny, ladies and gentlemen.
You're not nice.
You really hurt my feelings.
What we want, ladies and gentlemen,
breakfast.
what we want, ladies and gentlemen, is for the British government to dismantle the Muslim networks that are operating in the Home Office and pushing an Islamist agenda inside the state apparatus to be dismantled. Brother, I encourage you just to ignore them. They are feeding on your energy. The more you interact with them, the more they will misbehave. Just ignore them, please, if you want to help me. Now, ladies and gentlemen, we want the British government to arrest and prosecute the criminal Muslim rape gangs that are operating in our country, and every civil servant, every police officer, every councillor, every child protection officer, every social worker that helped to sweep it under the rug. We want to
You
see
look like you've been under
prosecutions.
a rug for 5 years.
And I suspect that the reason why the Labour Party will not give a national inquiry
It's 'cause you're a
to
tosser.
these Muslim rape gangs is because, ladies and gentlemen, many Labour politicians would fall and be swept up in such
What are
retribution,
you talking about?
including possibly
We've got news
Sir
to
Keir
give to the
Starmer himself.
You thick bastard.
We want the British government to uphold
Did you go to
freedom
night school to be this
of
sick?
speech
Or is it a natural
in our
gift?
institutions,
Feeding off your energy.
in our public debate.
You are.
More people have been arrested in the UK
Yeah.
for social media posts
Yeah.
than in Putin's
Have
Russia.
you been stealing food?
How is it
Have you
that
been shopping
we
at Harrods?
in this country have less freedom of speech than the Russians
Shut up, you wanker.
under a dictatorship that's run by a mafioso state?
Don't hurt his feelings, please.
Ladies and gentlemen,
There's no Labour.
these are the
We're all
reasons
homeless tramps.
why the Reform Party won the local
You're a member of the
elections,
Deform
and
Party.
Labour is not listening to the people. What we want, ladies and
It's
gentlemen,
lunch.
is for the
When do we
British
want it
state
now?
to break down the Islamist gangs that are operating in our prison systems,
You're such a
harassing,
third-rate
attacking,
columnist.
and forcefully converting prisoners inside our prisons and radicalizing them inside our prisons.
Crack dealers.
How low
What we want, ladies and gentlemen, is for the British state to pull out
Oh, thank
of
God
the
Britain has got you.
ECHR, the European Court of Human Rights, which is a hijacked internationalist court that serves the progressive internationalist agenda. What we want,
Who do you represent?
ladies and gentlemen,
Other than third-rate
is
Tommy
for
Robinson.
our government to stop funding ISIS in Syria.
Oh God! Now they're funding.
The British government
You better be
has
careful with
sent
the flag, my friend.
70 million pounds,
We want the British government to
70 million of your tax-paying pounds to jihadis in Syria
You're a jihadi.
who carried out massacres against the Alawites, and is currently threatening massacres against the Druze,
What about stalagmites?
and have forced the Christians from their villages and towns, all funded by your tax-paying money,
I don't pay tax.
because exactly,
You collected.
he just collects it. Our country is being sucked dry,
For poor people like
being sucked dry by migrants who are contributing nothing and are taking everything for granted.
you. Let them
Very
work.
Christian.
What we
All
want
your hotels
in our
and
country
restaurants are
is a
struggling
migrant
workers.
system that rewards legal, hard-working migrants. We're not opposed to migration. We're not opposed to helping refugees. But we want to take in real refugees, not economic migrants.
Yeah, that time.
And we want to reward migrants who can contribute to our country,
I want to
not those who are dragging it down into the mud.
We all want to
Most of those
gun salute.
migrants who have come from the Islamic world are sitting on the benefit system that you're all paying for, and they are contributing nothing to the UK.
What about all the Arabs in HY Road?
But your tax-paying money is funding jihadists in Afghanistan and Syria to the tunes of tens of millions of pounds.
And how are you helping?
Every pound that those governments do not have to spend on helping their own people is a pound that they can spend on spreading their vile ideology and their jihad abroad to other countries. What we want is a government that will affirm Christianity as the core identity of the nation, ladies and gentlemen, and place Christianity front and centre in public life.
Yeah, Christianity. Talk to us about.
What we want, ladies and gentlemen, is a government that will build up national pride of what it means to be British in this country. What we want, ladies and gentlemen, is for our great Führer, Sir Keir Starmer, to sack David Lammy, who is more concerned to be the Foreign Secretary for the Caribbean to the British Isles than he is to be the Foreign Secretary of the British Isles to the Caribbean, who posits that all of us should pay reparations for a slave trade that none of us participated in to people that were never slaves of ours. And furthermore, if you were born before the 1990s,
Big fucker.
that you have already paid taxes for in paying the reparations connected to the abolition of the slave trade in the 1700s. Furthermore, I'll take questions in a
If you
second.
learn to read and write, you wouldn't be here now.
Furthermore,
Slave masters.
David Lammy was the one that sent £70 million to jihadis. Why are you pushing? Why are you pushing?
You did exactly
Why
that.
are you pushing?
He did that to
Why
me.
are you pushing?
Stepped in front.
Yeah, you pushed. You pushed. You pushed. I saw him push you. Yes, you did. I saw him push you.
You did not push.
David Lammy is the one that sent £70 million to ISIS. That man should be immediately sacked. He is incompetent. We also want, ladies and gentlemen, that Lucy Powell should be sacked. Ladies and gentlemen, this week, Lucy Powell described standing up for the victims of Muslim rape gangs as dog whistle politics. I want to correct Lucy Powell. Normal people, good people, moderate people want to stand up for the victims of rape gangs, and we want to see them have justice. It is not dog whistle politics. Lucy Powell is an extremist and a left-wing dogmatist that does not deserve to be in public office. She is a disgrace. What we want, ladies and gentlemen, is for the Labour government to stop pushing liberal progressive bullshit into our culture and to recognise that women are real things, that they are an objective reality, and it doesn't depend on how you dress or whether you chop off a part of your body and whether you decide to call yourself a woman. And we want women in this country to be protected from hostile men masquerading as women. This is why, ladies and gentlemen, Reform won the local elections. If Keir Starmer and the Labour Party get it, they will take up these issues and bring them into government. They will return to the pensioners their winter allowance without delay. And they will deal with the fact that the NHS is completely saturated by people who have only just arrived, are not paying into the system, but are taking up places for people that are born here and are paying into the system. We all feel that it is unfair, and it is time that we continue this bloodless revolution with the Reform Party to get rid of the Labour Party. Any questions before I go on? Go on, sir.
Where were you born and why?
Go on, sir.
I heard a lot talking about slavery, but I have never heard anybody talking about the people who sold slaves.
Right. Let me talk about the people who sold slaves. The Muslim Arabs in Africa were the ones selling slaves to the white European slave traders. Africans in Africa were the ones selling slaves to the white European slave traders. So if we're going to talk about reparations, when are the Arabs going to pay reparations? When are the African tribes who sold slaves to the white Europeans going to pay reparations? Next question. Go on, sir.
Listen. Do you know 20 million Africans?
Sorry?
You are sharing a lot of your ideas with the Muslims,
You're
such
a
as
pathetic bastard.
not giving rights to trans or LGBTQ. How do you justify this?
So, ladies and gentlemen, the question is, ladies and gentlemen, that why should I talk about things to do with trans rights when that is an Islamic idea? But ladies and gentlemen, I'm not raising this because I'm imitating Islam. I'm standing up for women's rights because I am a Christian and I support the reality of women's existence and the need to defend women from aggressive men. Final question before I move on.
When are you going to fight?
Final question.
Bob, I've got a question. Bob, I've got a question.
Go on, since you've been good.
Right, Bob. What do you think the British government's response should be to the BBC's poor coverage of the Kashmir question, where gunmen asked people to recite an Islamic prayer and basically shot people in cold blood? Now, apparently there was... I haven't finished, Bob.
No.
I'm not doing a
Let him
speech.
speak.
No,
He's
I
more
said
interesting
Well,
I'm
what's your
just giving
question?
you the information.
Right, what's your question?
Right, I'm just filling you with the information, Bob.
You're
Because
assuming
as
that I
you
don't know.
Right, so one
the
of them
question?
was a Muslim, but by the sound of it, this was a Muslim doing the right thing and trying to stop the slaughter. Do you think it's irresponsible of the BBC to misreport Kashmir? Because I'm here for India, Bob. India is watching, Bob.
Right. So James hasn't asked a question on the
What about
topic,
the BBC's coverage of Kashmir?
but because he has actually behaved, I'm going to just show some courtesy to him, and I'll answer his question, even though it's wildly off topic.
No, it's not.
The BBC is run by progressive militants who distort information all the time. They distort information in the way that they frame things. They distort information in the way that they focus in on one issue rather than another. And they distort information by interviewing their own employees who are liberal progressives to give commentary from a liberal progressive perspective, all whilst you are paying for it in the BBC TV licence. The BBC is an irresponsible broadcaster that is guilty of misinformation to the British people. It should be abolished the BBC licence should be abolished, and all of these grifters in the BBC should go and get a real job, like Dan Wootton, like Tulsi TV, like Urban Media, and go out and create independent media, and then let the British people compete. Then let the British people decide where they want to get the news. Right, I'm going to go on
What about British Hindus?
in my presentation. So, Nigel Farage, we can see from his comments on Islam, is not the man of the moment. He's not the hero that we hoped he would be. But Reform's victory in these local elections is because of Brand Farage. And so, since it is Brand Farage that's cutting through to the non-politicised minds and winning their votes, even those of us like myself that don't like Farage should rally into Reform and use Reform as a battering ram to break into the echelons of power. And when, ladies and gentlemen, we find ourselves in cabinet, we use the authority that we have to start restructuring the state away from the liberal progressive agenda. And if Nigel Farage, who is just a Thatcherite conservative, should seek to impede such a political revolution, then he should simply be removed from the party. Nigel Farage just wants to be one of the elites. He doesn't want to be a disruptor to the elites, which is why people are voting for him. I encourage him to listen to his base.
They are the disaffected.
We should welcome, ladies and gentlemen, that we are now living in multi-party politics, and that people are not just blindly voting Conservative and Labour, but that they are looking elsewhere to place their political votes. That's a good thing, ladies and gentlemen, and we should seek to continue to disrupt the narrative that we should either vote Labour or Conservative, that it's just a binary choice. However, ladies and gentlemen, I want to be clear, I don't read the Daily Mail at all. I get my news sources from GB News, the BBC and the Guardian, precisely because I want to hear news from the perspective of my opposition. Now, ladies and gentlemen, let's be clear. All of the problems that I have raised, all of the problems that I have mentioned, liberal politics has no solution to any of them. We must start to think radically outside of the liberal paradigm, thinking within the Christian paradigm to find solutions to the problems that we face.